So welcome everybody. Welcome to Diversity in Spirits, Reclaiming Our Narrative as BIPOC and Multicultural Industry Leaders. Interesting thing about the title, originally it was claiming. And as we thought through this concept, I actually put in parentheses because as we'll talk about today, many of us are reclaiming the narrative of our motherland spirits, of our cultures, of our ancestry, as it pertains to spirits and as it pertains to us in this industry. My name is Joseph D. Solis. I have to kind of lay out the land in terms of the purpose of this roundtable for Tales of the Cocktail. This has been in the making for many, many, many years. Starting back in my career in the early days, and I do mean early before the gray hair and all of the late nights, if you would, always felt the need to be able to create a sacred space to have a open conversation with other BIPOC, multicultural, LGBTQ, women, et cetera, in this industry about our narrative. And quite honestly, there's no better time than now. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on in the world. There's a lot of things going on in our industry, specifically in spirits, that we'll be talking about today as well. So just to kind of give an idea, I do want to make sure that I'm setting the room, if you would, before I go into introductions. This is a sacred space, as I mentioned before, for us to be able to be who we are. Each and every person on this panel has been hand-selected for exactly who they are in their greatness, in their ability, in their gift. We do have three folks that couldn't make it because of timing today that I want to acknowledge. First is Ingrid Best, Executive Vice President of Combs Enterprises, Torrance Swain, and also Gina Castillo from Guadalajara, who is from El Tequileño and a overall tequila maestra, if you would. So they'll be with us in spirit. Just to clarify, we do have a couple words in the title of the seminar. One of them is BIPOC. So for those of you who don't know what BIPOC stands for, it's Black, Indigenous, People of Color. I also included the word multicultural. And as Manny, you're very close to that title, as that's been your title for the last 20 years in your career, is inclusive to not only people of color, but LGBTQIA, also women. And so it's very important to make sure that we are including all these perspectives in this discussion today. So super excited, as I mentioned, many, many years in the making to create this seminar, this roundtable. In my background, have found myself as being the token person of color. I used to laugh and say in this business, I used to be the only chocolate chip in the cookie. So I found it very important that we be able to have an open and honest discussion about where we are in this business. We will touch upon what we'll title as cultural appropriation, all those buzzwords that are currently happening, but I don't want us to get stuck there, guys. I really want us to acknowledge and really kind of from there create a space of empowerment in terms of what's next. What do we do as industry leaders within the BIPOC and multicultural community to ensure that the next generation of Black, Brown, LGBTQ and women bartenders have a seat at the table, or as I like to say, a seat at the bar, okay? So I'm going to begin introductions. I'm very honored and humbled that all of these wonderful people have chosen to be on this panel. I respect every single one of them. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I also will put some commentary as we go through the session today because each of them deserve their own accolades. And I want everybody to know why they've been hand-selected. So we'll start with Rebecca Quinonez.
Hello, everyone. Joseph, it's such a pleasure to be a part of this panel. Such an honor, and just like you said, just incredible, dynamic, talented individuals. And so I am honored to be here as well. And so thank you for selecting me. Manny, Alba, Tiffanie, I am honored. I am so, Tomas, I think this is the first time we're also connecting. And so I've been in industry, hospitality. First of all, I'm a first generation Latina in this country. I'm Nicaraguense American and very proud of it. I, throughout my career, have over 20 years, have focused on culturally relevant categories, culturally relevant brands. And so for us to have this conversation now about reclaiming is absolutely necessary. I've been in the industry, as I said, plus 20 years. I'm a second generation hospitality worker. My mother was a cocktail waitress and a bartender as well for 25 years. So it's in my blood. As I left a big illustrious career and started my own consulting agency, it's a global boutique agency focused on marketing and strategies and so forth. And it's consulting across all sorts of categories, agave-based spirits, luxury, as well as cannabis. And as Joseph talked, this is a little over 20 years in the making, you know, to be having this conversation now. And so what I do is, depending on the space or phase of business that clients are in, it's either accelerating, it's launching, it's advising. But what I also do that is extremely important is I teach people how to fish, right? In our community, it's absolutely important. I always say that it's a responsibility. As a first generation Latina, came into this country, I learned how to fend for myself. I was very blessed to land amazing, remarkable people around me, talent like Manny Gonzalez, like Joseph, who took a chance on me. And so that blessing and that opportunity allowed me for bigger opportunities. And now that I've been able to do what I've been able to do, it's my responsibility now is to also help the next generation behind me. I didn't have it that easy. We didn't have it that easy. And so what I do is empower and inspire. I focus mainly on BIPOC, specifically women of color, who are entering into this industry or who are a part of this industry and looking to launch their brand or their business. And so I feel that it is my responsibility is to help inspire and empower people to know where the landmines are, to create a sustainable business for themselves so that they learn how to fish and then they can teach others. And so, as I said, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with everyone and sharing the stage. And thank you for Tales of the Cocktail. And thank you, Joseph, for putting this together.
Of course. And I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge, one of the questions that I will have later that I'd like to leave with is if we were that young Black or brown bartender or someone entering this business, right? What advice would we give to them? So keep that in mind as we go through this conversation. But for Rebecca, I think it's really important to understand the context. Yes, you're second generation hospitality industry. You were also part of a program that I developed, I think the first ever tequila program for Diageo, 2005, so a very long time ago. So your perspective comes from on the ground. It also comes from being a brand ambassador. So, and then a global brand ambassador for Diageo and Zacapa and some of the higher marks all over the world. So what I'd like to do is paint a picture for that young Black or brown bartender. Like, these are the paths that you have in this industry. As we reclaim our narrative, as we have a place at the table, understand if you want to stay in the bar business, like Alba, who's coming up next, and own your own location, great. If you want to explore opportunities for advocacy, brand ambassadorship, you know, we have you, Rebecca, we have, you know, Tomas as well. If you want to stay in the industry and become a consultant, creating cocktails, which you love to do, and having a voice, you know, and be someone like Tiffanie, or you want to go into the marketing side and be a marketing executive, someone like Manny Gonzalez, who comes from the brand side. So ideally, what I've done is created pretty much a whole plethora of different ways that someone who's entering the industry or is in the industry, because we know that burnout is very real for bartenders, right? Our lifespan is very short. So what are the options? And hopefully this will inspire a path for them to get to the next level, okay? So that's also the intention as well. So I'm gonna pass it over to Alba. Before she introduces herself, I have to give her flowers in a sense that I think that she is the voice of Latinx, Latina-X empowerment in the wine and spirits industry. Also, for those who need to be inspired by taking the initiative and the entrepreneur, she is a woman-owned bar, which to me is super important in this conversation. So Alba, I'm passing the torch over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Joseph, for those kind words. So I'm super happy to be here just because I could see everyone today. It's just been a minute. And also, I love the narrative of this discussion. You know, I think there's not enough resources as especially in the last 22 years of my career, I've not seen enough resources available to someone like me or someone like us that are so clearly tuned in to the needs and the specific industry that we're in. So yes, but my current role is that I own a bar. I'm a business owner. I'm a small business owner. That became very apparent during COVID. The ownership status of your business. The other thing, I mean, I came from the bar background, so I've been bartending since 1998, and I've seen many faces of hospitality, especially behind the bar. You know, when I found cocktails is when I really fell in love with something that was tangible, that I felt that I was like, this is, clearly I need to learn a lot. And so I did, you know, and it was really exciting to kind of refresh that part of like motivation and to stay in the industry, you know, almost 12 years ago, I believe. Yeah, 12 years ago. So finding things that are really moving and finding things that are captivating is really important to avoid that quote unquote burnout that I know that we feel in the hospitality industry. But another thing that I really find to be really important to me is donating your time. And Rebecca touched on that a little bit. Donating your time to organizations and movements that you think are important. I not only do that with hospitality focus groups, I also do that with groups in other areas that are important to me. So I'm an immigrant. I was brought here by my parents when I was very little. So there's always that part, that landscaping of my personality, of my actual being, that I always think in that sense. So so I learn fast and I adapt quick, and I'm very you know, I can zero in on a room faster than anyone else, because when you are an immigrant, you're moving somewhere else, every single moment is a learning experience. So that's something that's never abandoned me. Like every single time I walk into a situation, a room, a different, you know, a different problem that I need to solve, it's like immediately the resourcefulness of that kicks in, and it's a beautiful thing to have. I've always been very grateful to be an immigrant. There's always this longing for your home when you know, for your home country, but then there's also this beautiful part of growing up in a new country and then making that part of your own. So I, if anything, get to benefit from both of those things in my life. To be completely honest with you, and you know, I'm always very sincere when it comes to when people ask me about running a business and owning a business and how that came to be. There's I think the saying is like there's many ways to skin a cat, and that's absolutely true. You know, that's absolutely true. When people come to me, they want to learn about how to open their own bar and how to do this, I'm always very honest, and I'm like, look, the best thing I can do for you is teach you how to make great decisions. Like, I'm going to teach you how to make the best decision for yourself at that moment with the variants and factors that you have available to you. But there's really a million ways to do this, right? But the one most important thing I always tell everyone is like, you have to know about finances. And you don't have to be a finance major. You just have to understand finances. You have to understand how the money goes in and how the money goes out.
Yeah,
it's not overly complicated, but that's also a good life lesson, right? We should all know how the money goes in and how the money goes out. So
also, Alba, I think it's also really important is how to find that money, right? So financing, investment, how to put together a deck, where do you even start, right? I'm glad that you mentioned the word home as well, because I really want to touch base with you, Tomas and Tiffanie, the cocktail shakers, if you would. Part of the theme in terms of reclaiming our roots is going back to our motherland cultures, right? In terms of ingredients, literally ingredients, and how do we reclaim that when we have so many people that think to make a Mexican-inspired cocktail, you muddle jalapeno, right? So I want to touch on that as we get a little bit. I know it's pretty tactical, but I think it's important to the story that we're about to tell. So I want to come back to you, Alba, on that as well, okay? And then let's go to Manny Gonzalez. For those of you who don't know, is a legend in this industry. Manny has been fighting the good cause for multicultural within wine and spirits. Manny, I'll let you tell us how many years you've been doing this, but you've been doing this before it was cool or before multicultural was a buzzword. I don't think that you get the props and the admiration that you deserve. So having you on this panel is my attempt to honor you for being such an advocate for us in this business forever. You've worked with every national brand, all of the big brands, fighting every day, sometimes for pennies, to ensure that Black and brown people have programming, that we have resources. You've hired me when I was starting my business, and I will forever be grateful for the opportunity that you gave me, and so many other of us. So for that, I want to say thank you. I'm going to pass the torch over to you, Manny, to do a quick introduction.
Well, Joseph, thank you very much for the kind words. I don't know what to say, but I definitely want to thank you for inviting me to this conversation and to tell everyone else, my fellow panelists, it's an honor to be with you all today. As Joseph mentioned at the outset or the introduction, I think I've been in the business of marketing, quote unquote, marketing for over 25 years. And the three buckets that I would say I've worked in is one in media. Speaking about culture, I did have the opportunity at one time to be living and working in Los Angeles for La Opinión, the oldest Spanish language daily newspaper in the country. I've also worked for an ad agency where I advocated multicultural initiatives and strategies, got to work with some amazing national retail brands like CVS Pharmacy and Chili's and TJ Maxx. And then most recently in my journey, I've worked in consumer products, primarily in the beverage alcohol space. I've worked in beer, but most of my career has been in wines and spirits, mostly at Moet Hennessy, but I did have an opportunity to work at Diageo, as Rebecca remembers, a little bit on Buchanan's and Johnny Walker, those little Scotch whiskey brands. But I just want to definitely demonstrate my appreciation to Joseph for bringing me on board. Even to this day, I'm currently in DC. I'm doing a little bit consulting. I decided to take the summer off, and then next month I'm actually going to start teaching a marketing class here in DC. And I've always wanted to get back into the classroom. Because I think you all are educators. We're all educators, and Joseph alluded to the mission that we all see ourselves having, and Rebecca talked about this, that I think if we view ourselves as educators and try to convey our mission and our narrative to other educators, I think we all benefit. And that's how the word spreads, is that when we start talking about what is important to us, is that we target we often hear the word influencers, but I'd rather identify the educators, because they're the ones who will make sure to convey whatever message we want to spread.
Perfect. Agreed. Thank you, Manny. Just following up, next introduction to the panel is my dear friend, Tiffanie. One of the people in this business that I respect, not only from my mind intellect, but from my heart. Tiffanie, also known as the drinking coach out of Atlanta, Georgia. When I was putting this together and using the word narrative, there's nobody who encompasses that word like the way that Tiffanie does. So when she does a post on Instagram, every cocktail has context, a history, a story connecting back to culture, connecting back to African-American culture, It's pure magic. So I am honored to have you here, Tiffanie. You know that I adore you. And a quick little introduction from you.
I'm humbled. Thank you so much. Hopefully you can hear me clearly, and background noise sounds like I'm in a party, and it's always a party where I am, but goodness. I'm so happy to be in this space with sisters and brothers that I've admired from afar and that have kept me motivated. Again, Tiffanie Barriere, also known as the Drinking Coach, representing Atlanta, Georgia, and I love to say representing the South. The South has a very rich history, and we can clearly see that I am African American. Truly, my family is Creole. So I come from Opelousas, Louisiana. My people are covered in season and spice and surface. And so coming into this industry was a no-brainer for me. But the thing about me jumping in this industry was that I thought it was what I was supposed to do. The Black community has always just helped. We've cooked, we've cleaned, we've smiled, we've driven. We've taken care of a lot of people in this country since the mid-1600s. And so jumping into it early in my age, again, something that I thought I was supposed to do, but also something that I was told was not a real job. It was just something that you do for coins and change. Little did I know, drinking the way my family drank and celebrating our culture on the worst days of our lives, we still celebrated. I began to understand my love for people and enjoying the beautiful things in life. Excuse me. And jumped behind the bar immediately and became very good at it naturally. But I didn't know that. And I knew that I had a palate, and I knew I had a love, that I had a heartbeat that I don't think some of the owners at the time understood that's what was needed for to have a great staff. So I excelled really quickly in educating service and in understanding palate. But as I started to grow into competitions and starting to learn the ins and outs of this industry, the competition is what really got me to shift and stand up for not only what I thought I knew, but who I was. I co-owned and operated One Flew South, which was the busiest and best airport bar in the world for 5+ years. I read, and people kept downsizing us. That's just an airport bar. We were not real bartenders yet. We were a full restaurant and a craft bar with an airport outside of us. And holding down that entire staff and program, we gained a lot of awards, and I had a completely Black staff. I found out within all of the writing and the ones that were journaling us were always focused on the surprise point that we were on all Black staff, or that we were at the airport, and really not paying attention to the fact that we were very educated and we knew what we were doing. I knew then that we needed to stand up even more, even though we did not want to be awarded for those characteristics of who we were naturally, but we have to really stand up for what we are, because it seems to be unheard of that the Black community can be this great in service, seeing that we've been in this position, unfortunately put in that position our entire being in the country. Once I left One Flew South, it was just full throttle. We've got to represent on multiple levels. I just saw our industry in a whole, not just the bar. I saw education, I saw multicultural, I saw the queer community. I saw so many connections that we said we had the resources, but I didn't see those resources being shared. As Alba said, everyone has kind of pinpointed, we're just missing a link here. We're missing the true conversation. We're not educating the narrative, the souls of this country. And so I haven't looked back since and continue to focus on education. Obviously, the cocktails and the ins and outs of what encompasses a cocktail, but let's talk about the ingredients, the agriculture, the other people who have placed their work ethics and labor into the spirits. And I make a point to share that every single day, all day long. And working with brands as I do on a daily basis, we make a point to connect as the educator and influencer, that we are educating the narrative of the spirit, just not the presentation of the cocktail. That's the short version.
On average, Tiffany, how long does it take you to create a post? Because you just don't post. There is.
No. So my research is a rabbit hole, just like you research anything. So it could take months. I mean, I have lots of things that I just have written that I want to just share, but to make the post that's readable, that you all actually read and share, roughly 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. The very last thing is the cocktail, and it's very difficult. It's not an easy thing, and it also takes a lot of my energy because sharing those stories hurt because they've never been shared, and some of them always don't end well. So trying to find the silver lining in that hurt, it takes even more time to even project it.
I'm sure. Well, if it makes any difference, your posts are incredible. They educate, they inspire, and I can't wait for the book.
It's on the way.
Of course it is. I wouldn't doubt it. Tiffany and I have worked together quite a few different times on a couple of different brands, and always deliver. And yeah, I can't wait to jump in a little bit deeper for the panel. Last but not least, my brother Tomas de los Reyes. Tomas and I go back. Oh my God, Tomas. 27 years. I was a club promoter in San Francisco and Tomas was the bar back. That's how far back we go. So Tomas de los Reyes, fellow Pinoy from the Bay. He's here for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's a perfect example of being in this business, going from being a bar back through a brand ambassador. Tomas was I hired Tomas to be a Moet Hennessy and Belvedere ambassador, God, I don't know how many years ago. And from there has just kind of taken, the industry and shaped the piece of clay that he needed it. Why I had him on this panel, aside from those reasons, is that as a Filipino, an Asian American, if you would, in this business, going back to motherland spirits, which is the inspiration for this whole, panel, Tomas has reconnected with his Filipino roots via Filipino rum, which I think is such an important story to tell. So Tomas, I'm going to hand it over to you.
I don't know what else to say at this point. He dropped my whole history. Well, first of all, thanks, Joseph, man. We go way back from the nightclub days in San Francisco. Had no idea that this would be the path that I've taken, but I realized there was a love for it. There was love for the people. I'm sure we're going to go into the challenges, but I think most importantly, I was just talking with another gentleman, a fellow Filipino, yesterday about starting a program. So my background in this has been, I started off as a bar back. Took me a while to finally get into actual bartending, a bartending shift. And once I got into that, I felt a whole nother level of energy, of power, of connectivity. And I think more or less I got addicted to that part. And it really wasn't until, I bartended in San Francisco, LA. And then when I moved to New York back in the early 2000s, I was able I was originally hired to be a DJ at a restaurant, but they needed a bartender. And so I jumped in as a bartender and really wasn't doing the DJ thing for a while. And it it happened to be the right place at the right time to where I was exposed to a lot of people, a lot of brands, they would come in because it was a hot spot in New York. And I saw the opportunities. I was, quick to jump on the opportunities and start connecting with these people. And really that space in New York as a whole helped me develop the ability to be aware of opportunities and then really just craft your networking game because, I run with a crew of people that understand, the power of your worth is your network, right? And through that, I was able to do a lot of freelance work. I got turned on to a lot of brands and eventually launched my own production company that focused on bringing that craft cocktail culture to events. These brands gave me the freedom just to create experiences, really lay into the art that I do, as a personal passion, and bring that to the craft cocktail event production scene. From then, I was able to work my way back into the Filipino community, and I opened a groundbreaking restaurant in the East Village in New York City, and I was a founding member and the bar manager there. That opened it up to a lot more, and we're talking about circling back and reclaiming our narrative and our and heritage and all of that. That is where I was like, oh, okay, now I can put this back into the Filipino culture. So I connected that. Moved on from that, actually. So I'm still connected, but I was able to now create a culture of, or bring in more Filipinos into the culture. So from then, I still had this, I knew I still needed to stay within the world of spirits, but more so, I was always gunning to work with brands. Once I got exposed to it, I wanted to work. So a few years after that, Joseph approached me with the idea and the opportunity. And that's when I started, back in 2015 is when I started working with Moet Hennessy as the New York ambassador, the spirits portfolio ambassador. And again, it just, the levels, I was able gratefully to level up again. And then that's where I landed a position of opportunity, but also that's when I really started thinking about giving back. And, part of it had to do with age. A lot of it had to do with experience. And I found myself spending a lot more time with the younger bartenders, because I started to see, as this culture of the cocktail culture and, the money, and then, there was the celebrity of it all started to grow. You started to see a lot more hungry young bartenders. And, I gravitated towards them, one, through the staff trainings that I would do, because you can easily pick out who's the hungry ones when you're feeding out knowledge, because I was that hungry young bartender as well when brand ambassadors would come and do tastings. I understood that this was the path, because this was the path with new language and new language that you can share. But alongside that, I should also note that part of my career was in fashion retail. So I worked my way up in fashion retail to where I was in, where I stopped was luxury retail. Spent some time in luxury retail, where that actually helped me understand networking more, but also building a client book. So we can talk about that or later on. It was really important for me for my development, but also being able to build this toolbox to share. Long story longer, I left New York, but I also left representing Moet Hennessy, and a full circle, am now working and as the regional manager for the West Coast for a Filipino rum company. And this platform, the more I work with this company, the more I realize that this is what I've worked for, because I now have a platform to empower, Filipinos that are interested. I am in position to help shape that next wave of Filipinos in the hospitality industry, whether you want to be a bartender, barback, manager, whatever, owner, server, I've touched all these positions, and I'm really excited for this next wave and this opportunity to give back, because it's not, at this point, it's not about the money. It's about bringing us all up together.
I love that. I don't know if it's not just about the money, but I love the.
Come on.
I love the
money. Yeah.
But no, what I love that's connected between each and every person's story is that this is personal, right? This is way beyond being a bartender or being an executive or a consultant or whatever it may be. This is about something that is sparking the internal connection to who we are, to the essence of who we are. When I started in this business, again, I realized that it was dominated by general market. And You know, sometimes we're forced to be in positions where we're the token Black or brown person, or the token gay person, or the token woman, right? And now that each person has done an introduction, we've kind of set the playing field about the power, and I use that term in a very positive way, but I can also call it influence, that each and every one of you have to do what you need to do with what you have, the resources to create change, right? As we start to talk about what's next. But I do want to make sure that I'm going back to something, because we're talking about narrative, and it's important that we define ourselves and that I define people how we want to be defined. So for Alba, I used the word Latinx. I apologize if that's not the term that you prefer. So I want to make sure that we're clear that I want to respect that, you know, you go as Latina, which I think is also important to this story as well, right? Telling our own personal narrative and defining who we are is also very important. So I want to jump into, and that's a perfect kind of segue into hot topics, right? Let's get Wendy Williams, hot topics, right? What is going on right now in the wine and spirits industry? Again, don't want to stay in this space, but we can't move forward without acknowledging where we are in terms of cultural appropriation, in terms of the abuse of our sacred motherland spirits, right? The interpretation of what our spirits and what our cocktails should taste like. And more importantly, who's owning this? Not only the spirits, but who's owning the narratives? So I'm going to open up a little bit, you know, in terms of, you know, us reclaiming our narrative. You know, what are some of the things that we've done in order to fight the good fight, if we would, in a way that allows us to help reshape that narrative? I think it's also, you know, important to put into context, you know, with for example, with COVID, right? I saw millions and millions of dollars being given to the bar, you know, community, but I saw very little of that trickling down into Black and brown communities. Why is that? You know, is it a cis white male dominated industry? Where do we have to fight in order to get representation? What do we have to do in order to ensure that we are getting the resources that we need to continue to uplift and to educate folks in our business? We're in a very different place in the world. You know, cancel culture is everything right now, right? Hot buttons everywhere you turn. You can't turn or do anything without having some kind of, you know, something going on. So I want to open up the discussion. And again, this is I'm not going to call on you guys. This is friend, you know, colleagues, but I want to open the discussion about the context. What are we doing in order to stand for what we believe in the context of cultural appropriation and the I don't know, let's call it the abuse of our motherland spirits and cocktails?
So one of the things that has become, I guess, kind of more accessible to me is that probably in the last year, there's been more and more companies that are coming to me asking questions about cultural appropriation, and they're asking, you know, how do you feel about this? What do you think about that? They are in the spirits industry. And one of the things I always say is that when we're talking about culture and we're talking about what is actually relevant to our culture, like, and for spirits industry, for the spirits industry related business, like we can focus on like Cinco de Mayo specifically. That tends to be a lot of, there's now a lot of questions revolving around it. And one of the things that I truly feel around Cinco de Mayo is that, and I always say this to everyone, it's like, look, that's a made up holiday. Like if you're using Cinco de Mayo to sell product, I think that whoever made that holiday up is a brilliant marketing person. I understand business, so I can see the reason why that is a useful tool for a business. The problems that I have with it are the images that can be very disruptive, images that can be used to continue just kind of narrowing down this conversation that, you know, people of Latin descent are you know, not to be respected. You know, anything that I find disrespectful. So the use of images and the use of a tool that disrespects that culture is what I have a problem with. The actual made up holiday really means nothing to people in Mexico. Like, it means, you know, it's a very small page in this small paragraph in the page of history. But when that becomes such a prominent dollar driving economy for the spirits, specifically by the spirits industry in another country, we have to be very tasteful when it comes to the tools that are being used to promote that particular day, right? And then in contrast, if you are utilizing Dia de los Muertos as a tool to promote and sell alcohol, that is a very different story. Because for Dia de los Muertos, that is actually a tool that we use in our culture to teach our children, to teach the younger generation about their family and it is that is actually a cultural movement. That is how we educate our family. That's how we become tied to all of our ancestors. There's true beliefs of how they come and visit us during these times, and there's a lot of spirituality there. So using that as a tool to sell alcohol, I think there's a huge line that you're crossing during you know, that if they're not respected and it's not done well, that can really actually hurt someone. That can really hurt someone's feelings. It could really make you have a very different perspective on that brand, yeah. Right? So when we discuss, so that's a long story to just basically tell you that the tools utilized when borrowing a culture are very important, and you need to know where they actually stem from. Like, if this is something that is culturally relevant to a country, people, you know, with people of color, and then you're utilizing that tool, exploiting it in a way that is not in a respectful way to the narrative of where it began, then that is something that you need to reevaluate. Yeah. You know, it's okay to reevaluate, is what I tell a lot of, and it's funny how many different, how many different times I've had this conversation, and I'm like, it's okay to reevaluate, and it's okay to be in a position where you're like, oh, I didn't think about that, but it's not okay to continue to do those things, especially not in the life that we're living in now.
I agree.
You know,
and I think, Alba, you touched on something that's really important. I think it's integrity, right? It's integrity, and it's also respect. One of the things as I opened up that I forgot to mention that was a buzzword was also sustainability and the ethics of the earth, right? And so, Rebecca, I don't know where you were going with this, but really quickly, when we're talking about, you know, cultural appropriation, AKA let anybody who can breathe create a tequila, for example, right? You know, aside from the marketing, Alba and everyone else, we also need to consider the ethics around Mother Earth and sustainability. So Rebecca, I'm not sure if you were going there with that one, but I know you're very passionate about this. So I think it makes sense for you to comment, you know, quickly on what that means. Right,
the environmental impact, right? So as the category continues to grow, and we're going to specifically talk about agave-based spirits and tequila here, as we're discussing, as the category continues to grow and the demand for agave-based spirits continues, the US market is the #1 market in the world in consumption for tequila and mezcal. You know, that directly impacts the communities in Mexico. And so as educators, responsible educators, we need to talk about that. You know, not only the social impact, the community impact, the environmental impact, it's an economic impact. And so what is that? What are the companies, who are the brands that are actually on the ground directly helping those communities? And so I think we also, as educators, we also have to educate our consumers, you know, as to, you know, who's using pesticides, you know, who's actually created an environmentally safe and sustainable business for the brand and so forth, and for the community. And so there's a lot to discuss. And so cultural responsibility, environmental responsibility, social, community, economic, all of it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, I mean, for those who are participating or rather listening in on this conversation, we could spend 3 hours and 3 seminars. But, you know, once the agave is done, the earth is not hardy anymore. So we're leaving families, you know, we're leaving families and people with literally nothing once we rob the land of, you know, overplanting and you know, really sort of abusing the land, if you would, just for the agave production of tequila, right? So these are some of the things that I also consider cultural, you know, cultural impact, not so much appropriation as it is something to think about as we talk about the ethics, right? Alba, we mentioned the word ethics, like what is the ethical thing to do? So Manny and Tiffanie, Tomas, what is your perspective on cultural appropriation within the wine and spirits industry? And I don't want to, you know, I want to make sure that we're getting a perspective that's well-rounded. I know that the Asian community is dealing with a lot of that recently as well. And I'm not putting you on the spot, Tomas, to be the token Asian person on the panel. I mean, I'm Pinoy as well, but you know, it's interesting what's going on in the Asian Pacific Islander community as well. So open the table to all the rest of you.
All right, I'll jump in. So when we talk about cultural appropriation, but I've got to look back at the history of the Philippines in general, or as a whole, because if you look through history, the colonization that's happened over and over in the Philippines, really, it's made it tough for me as a Filipino American to attach myself to that cultural heritage. So I'm kind of going in a different direction with it, and I'm aware that it's there. So, but it's more us now trying to understand it, because right now what I'm experiencing is a wave of Filipino Americans really hungry for this, the attaching themselves to their culture, really understanding their heritage. So before we can even step into the conversation of really of cultural appropriation, I think it's important for us to really just get our grounding on our own first together. So that is the stance that I'm taking on it right now. As I was saying earlier, I'm looking, I have a platform, and I want to really connect with Filipinos that are hungry for their to represent their culture as Filipinos and Filipino Americans first. That's really where I'm going.
Can I build on that?
Absolutely, Manny.
I talked earlier about seeing all of us as educators, and we should be targeting the educators and yes, influencers. But what Tomas just said reminded me of something that, believe it or not, I said 20 years ago at a Hispanic marketing conference. Mind you, 20 years ago, and I was asked a question about how, as a Hispanic agency, they should approach the marketplace to teach corporate America about Hispanic consumers. 20 years ago, I said, if you don't get the Hispanic market now, you will never get it. And my point was that we as educators should target those educators and influencers that I believe are genuinely receptive to our message and narrative, and they will spread the word. I don't think we should waste our time with people who will never get it. And so who are some of those people in this industry? I was on a panel when I was still living in New York about Black and brown owned businesses. I'm a huge practitioner of that. I live on 8th Street Northeast in Washington, D.C. There's a restaurant a couple blocks down from where I live. It's owned by a Veracruz family. I go there. There's a new club a few blocks further down that's owned by an Ethiopian. I don't know if you know about Washington, D.C., but there are a lot of Ethiopian-owned businesses, and they take pride in being Black-owned. And so, and this new club that is owned by an Ethiopian owner, he sells a lot of tequila. And I was at his place over the weekend. We had a long conversation about tequila. I told him that I love it. And I told him that I'm from Mexico. I just met the man, but he's one of those educators. He's also a business owner that is receptive to my message about, the pride of my country. You know, I was born in Mexico, immigrated, Joseph, as you know, my family immigrated to LA when I was 5. What a lot of people don't know, because I don't talk much about it, but when my parents immigrated to LA, my dad's first job was being a bartender in Placencia, California, Orange County. And I don't know if that's why I ended up working in wines and spirits, but I think in terms of spreading our message and our narrative, I know it's not very easy to, in an industry dominated by white men, to, at every level, right? The 3 tiers, to go to Black and Brown Asian owned businesses. But I think from my standpoint, that's where it starts. We have to nurture each other, or else the larger community won't get it. And I think there is an opportunity, even in my little neighborhood of the 8th Street corridor, to practice what I preach.
Amen. That's great, Manny. Thank you. Tiffanie.
Yes, of course, I agree with all of that. It's the Black community. I believe that we are currently focused, and a lot of businesses are focused on healing from the past. So a lot of these stories have not been shared. It's still an aha moment when you find out something that someone Black did. We're still first generation. All of these cultures on this panel, we're still first generation right now. And so as we're uncovering these stories and honoring them and saying their names, I believe, and this is my opinion, I believe we're still in between a point where we're honoring what's happening right now and educating what's happening right now, because we're still learning and healing from the past. And so the community and communities are right in between. As Thomas said, we're there, but we're trying to grow so much and heal at the same time from what has happened from the past. I believe that all of us, this not being our country, as whatever culture Americans, there's still so much work to be done. But it is all about education. So what Manny said, supporting one another, showing the others, this is what we do, this is how we vibe, this is what it feels like, this is what it looks like, and making it comfortable. Speaking about slavery is not comfortable. Being an immigrant is not, just sharing, what you went through, not comfortable. Not speaking a certain language or being, offered the same opportunities early in age or from your grandparents. It's not a comfortable conversation. When we make it a comfortable conversation, meaning, oh, I heard that story, or we say it all the time, possibly we can have some moving forth versus some awkward silence or too much silence, because some of these allies are saying, we're just going to listen. We're not going to say anything, but they've got to say something. They've got to do something as well. And so what we're seeing come out in words, have to see more in action, but they're also watching what we do within ourselves, our own communities. And we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do. But I do believe the work that we have to do is really encompassed around the heartbeat that we have, the passion that each one of us have in our different categories or our different cultures. And I think that's when we'll start making things appropriate. I don't think this country will ever be culturally appropriate because of its past. But or however, shall I say, we can start to make some of the stories, the ill will, the narrative, the appropriate, because it's the truth. Let's talk about what's the truth, and try to build from there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Tiffanie, that you're talking about like the truth, because I wanted to shift a little bit about the actual talent. I think often us as people of color in this business, as creators of cocktails, as interpreters of these spirits, oftentimes get discriminated upon are, if you're a Black or brown bartender in a white establishment, we often find that, people think that your drinks are going to be too sweet, right? Or people are going to think that you don't know how to make a balanced cocktails when we're using things like chartreuse that never were ever in our repertoire as people of color, right? And I think it's important to actually talk about this, since I have all of you here, both cocktail adorers and also cocktail makers like myself. Like, I know it's hard to fight the good fight, right? But I think there needs to be an equal playing field in terms of us being able to show our talent. I know that, diversity has been a big agenda for Tales of the Cocktails. Thank you very much, Tales. In the last few years, I think it's really stepped up. A lot of the other organizations, you're seeing corporate America, investing into diversity. But again, like with COVID, right? Millions of dollars being raised to support the bartender community, but very little of that trickling down to Black neighborhoods, to Latino neighborhoods, right? So, if we can just comment 1 second about credibility and allowing us to shine and allowing us to interpret our own spirits, right? Like not doing the avocado toast and the birria tacos interpreted by like, white cis, organizations. Like, how do we claim back our narrative when it comes back to us being talented, being gorgeous in what we do?
Well, I think it begins, sorry to chime in, but it begins with where you all have started, and that is to be bold. Joseph, I can remember when you were working with us on the event for the Hispanic Federation in New York, and you were the one who came to me and said, let's do something with aguas frescas. That was like pioneering. So
a long time ago, not now. That was a while ago. It was not as pioneering now.
Hear me. So a couple of days ago, I had to go into New York for an appointment. I walk into Chipotle, and on their menu it says aguas frescas. It's like, it made me think of you, because you came to us at Moet Hennessy and said, let's do something with Hennessy and aguas frescas. And it took this, white-owned large national retailer that is Chipotle to finally in 2021 to put aguas frescas in their menu if they are going to be authentically Mexican in their food. So it does take bold pioneers like all of you on this panel to initiate the conversation, to engage people in the narrative. One of my biggest favorite media personalities, may rest in peace, with Anthony Bourdain, because not only was he able to teach people about culture, but he had the uncanny ability to make you curious at the same time. Like, okay, I just grabbed your attention. I'm going to throw more information on you. And he was a big advocate for street food. And I think that's part of the narrative. That's part of the education that we want to spread. And that is, I was just in Mexico City, street food, those tacos. I remember, you guys know TK, when he hosted me in Ho Chi Minh City a few years ago, he taught me how to eat Vietnamese street food. It's like, and just like Anthony Bourdain did. And I think it's those cultural nuances that we have to remind people of, that do in more ways than one define who we are as people of color.
Right.
100%, Manny. That was spot on. The Black community. That's it. I believe the boldness, whether we think it's bold or we've just been fed up and we have to say something, or you just get bored. The same as the agua fresca. The watermelon for the Black community has just been, the connection has just been so heavy. The
Yes.
Watermelon being one of the fruits that we could actually grow on our own as slaves, and we would stuff it, underneath our cotton bin when we were hot outside to eat it for refreshment. And the owners of the African community, or the owners of the slaves, would allow us a few days of the day to go and enjoy your watermelon and grow your watermelon for your own people. Then after 5 years, they're like, wait a minute, this freedom, you guys are doing too much freedom. You look like you're too happy. Seeing the Black face with a watermelon was looked at as, they're lazy, they're free. And so coming from mid 1800s into, hell, 2 years ago, I can even say that some of my Black friends, like being seen eating watermelon was just unsaid. You are not going to eat watermelon in public. We ate our watermelon within our own, because if we thought other cultures saw us eat watermelon, they either thought we were basic, we were lazy, or it just didn't look good because of Black face. Here we are now. Last month was National Watermelon Month. Wait a minute. I'm like, wait a minute. Where was this 100 years ago? And now the watermelon's appreciated and the seed is understood. It's also grown in Asia. And it's just the change. But if someone did not say, hey, did you know that the watermelon was one of the seeds that were in the pockets of the slaves that came over at this time? You know, the slaves, and really educating the importance of a fruit that we all love to eat, and it brings nothing but joy, but explain why it's here. Now it's like, wow, you know, let's give some respect to that. And now you'll see everyone eat watermelon, and now even more Blacks in public and in photos. But it's the boldness. It's finally saying, you know what, we're gonna tell the truth, so we can eat more watermelon, or you know, or other things. Put it on the menu, put it everywhere, and own it. You know.
I mean, connecting the dots, like agua fresca de sandia. I mean, come on now. It's
Exactly.
like, can't go wrong with that one. So, but yes, and you know, Tomas, I didn't, when you were talking earlier, like, I know that you represent rum right now, but you want to talk about one of the most colonized spirits in the world. Rebecca, you spent many years being an ambassador, global ambassador for rum. You know, I know we've talked about agave spirits, but let's take 1 second to talk about rum. And in terms of reclaiming, you know, the narrative, Tomas, like, you have a double-edged sword. You actually have to fight the colonization story, as well as reclaiming the Filipino story, as well as representing Filipino rum in a category where it's dominated by rums from around the other parts of the world. What is that like for you?
It's interesting, because what I learned was that the Philippines, first of all, sugarcane was originally found in Papua New Guinea and migrated and really grew like weeds in Southeast Asia, and then made its way over to the Caribbean, South America, and the US. So just learning that history was interesting in itself. But I also learned that the Philippines has been producing rum since 1854. And it's almost been one of the, I almost wanted to call it the better kept secrets, considering that it was really homegrown and home owned for a long time outside of the appropriation side. So, you know, working with the brand that I work with now as a young brand, we're really just pushing that cultural pride even further. So it's really it's a matter of cultural pride on my end. I almost want to say more so than the appropriation part, because it's, I mean, we can talk about the appropriation over the colonization, but the root and the plant itself and the rum it's been part of the cultural internal domestically for a long time.
Yep. And it's interesting, Rebecca, hopefully you can comment on the connection between the Philippines and Mexico as it pertains to the evolution of agave spirits.
It is incredible. You know, Tomas, you know, the Philippines as a Mesoamerican, Nicaraguense, Central American, you know, we're colonial cousins, you know, and so the first Filipinos to arrive in Central America, Mexico in particular, you know, the Galleon trade brought over vino de coco, right? And so you already had that education of distilling in clay pots. And so that was the inspiration for the local indigenous communities to make mezcal. And so the Filipino production process of mezcal production is still called the Filipino production, right? It's called the way of distilling, Filipino distillation, okay? And so, yes, we are colonial cousins.
Yep.
Sugarcane, as you correct, you know, you were absolutely right. Papua New Guinea, right? Started off in Asia. We still don't know who actually created rum. You know, sugar was too much of an important commodity to waste it on rum. Some of us think it was probably the Egyptians, you know? So the Chinese say it was them, you know? And so here we are, right? And it was Christopher Columbus's third voyage to the island of Hispaniola, which is present day Dominican Republic and Haiti, brought seedlings of sugarcane leaves, and they were planted on the island. Okay, so you're right, absolutely right. It was brought over. It was something that wasn't ancestral to our land, and with the sugarcane explosion came the darkest part of the history that we don't talk about, and that's the slave trade, right? And so here we are, right? Empires were built off of the slave trade and the sugar production to Europe. Okay, and so there's a lot of history, there's a lot of ugly history, like you said, Tiffanie, uncomfortable conversations that people are not ready to have, right? And so there is an incredible cultural connection. It is a part of my culture, you know, rum, you know, as well as, you know, agave-based spirit, tequila and mezcal. But yes, it's uncomfortable conversations that we need to have, not only on the production method, but there's just so much rich, dark history, and on top of it, it's again, what are we reclaiming? You know, people didn't know that Filipinos were some of the largest consumers of rum in the world, right? Yeah. And that you represent the most important rum brand in the world.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's, you know, it's not a Caribbean rum.
Right. That part, yes.
I actually represent a newer brand. But,
pardon.
Yeah, a much younger brand. Just so we're clear on that. But it was because of the bigger brand that's been around since 1854. They really paved the way for us.
And I think what you've done is brilliant, and it's very similar to what we've all done. I've had the honor of working with Manny. Obviously, Joseph was part of a pilot program, and so what you did is you absorbed all of the learnings with Moet Hennessy and the bigger players, right? Refining your presentation skills, your public speaking skills, right? Your history, your knowledge on the category, and so forth. And so you'd be able to apply that to a smaller brand that has the same set of values and authentic story. Right? And then empowering people in your community to tell that authentic story. That's absolutely beautiful.
And super excited, Rebecca. Sorry to jump in, but I think you just literally like hit the bullseye, right? We are oftentimes forced to work within the white corporate structure. If not work within it, we can't escape it. Take what you need, right? Learn, take all the skill sets that you need, and then apply it accordingly to do what you do in life. And I think it's incredible. Side note though, if anybody ever has a chance to go to the Cascawin distillery in Mexico, Rebecca and I actually went, and there is a little outside distillery, Tomas, that's called the Filipino, what is it called, Rebecca?
It's the Filipino still.
Yeah, the Filipino still. It's really cool. So anyways, we believe it or not, we are almost done with this. We can talk for hours about this, but I want to shift this, as I mentioned before, into empowerment. And I think each of you can take this question and really roll with it, right? And the question is going to be, you know, if I was a young Black or brown, you know, bartender starting in the industry, what advice would you give me from your perspective and from your lane? And the second part of the question is, what does giving back look like personally for you, right? To the industry, to your heritage, to your ancestors, right? I don't want to make it sound so grand and deep, but one, what is giving back with what you know, right? Our experiences, what made each and every one of you leaders in this business? What have you learned? What does that give back look like? And then what advice would you have for somebody coming up in this business? We can start with Alba.
Thanks, Joseph. So just to go back a little bit on the previous question, I think that it's really important to reclaim your cultural richness, things that are part of your heritage, but most importantly, I think it's important to claim a seat at the table. And when you were talking about the discussion of, you know, being typecasted because I am Latina and what I can actually do, I think the biggest door that I ever needed to like go through was just access, right? So having access to education, like when you see brands take people on trips, they're learning about spirits. They're going to go see, you just mentioned going to Cascawin. I've been to Cascawin, but I went there on my own dollar. You know, but going to visit a distillery, going to see things that will enrich your career, that will enrich your education is really important. So giving access to more people with a wider diversity lens, I think is really important, because that will inevitably make you a master of your craft. So to answer your current question, when we're talking about the younger generation, right, which is very, like, I love the younger generation. The way that they operate is just incredible. Like they are ready for things to happen right now. And like, we weren't necessarily those people, you know, we were just kind of like, okay, well, we have a strategy and it's going to work like this. It's going to be a little bit longer and blah, blah, blah. But the current generation is bam. And so what I would tell that generation is that I love that you do that. You absolutely continue to be that force that wants to have answers, that wants to see things change right now. Because if you aren't, and to borrow Manny's you know, phrase, like, if you aren't bold, you won't be seen. So that's so important. And and what I think is going to do, what we're going to see is, like, what we need to do is open the door for them, right? Like, just let's open the door for this generation with this voice that is so fierce. Like, I'm not afraid of them. I think that they have a great set of, like, a great mentality to just say that these things are wrong. They need to be changed right now, and they need to happen immediately. And so I think that also with that comes a lot of grace and understanding, you know. So with the scope of what we were talking about, the spirits industry, you know, there's more acceptances need to be for that type of voice, for that type of energy. And I think that we're going to be moving, and the next generation is going to be making some really, really, like, big waves as we start to evolve. So someone from my position also needs to look at that and I'm totally enamored with it, and not be afraid, and welcome and open doors and give access and give opportunities, and also mentor, you know, like, continue to mentor and explaining, like, this is how these things happened when I was in your shoes. These are the decisions that I made that were good for the progress of my career. And I think that there's communication that needs to be, that needs to be there. These types of panels are super important, but overall, I think that I'm really excited about the next phase. I'm really excited about what the future of this industry looks like, because that voice, that younger voice, is really, really, like, really, really profound.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, shout out to the younger generation. But in addition to that, not just the younger generation, but there's folks like us, there's folks that have been behind the bar, behind the stick for 10 years. I get calls constantly because I do mentor a lot. I've mentored people my entire career. It's part of my code of ethics. But, you know, I get calls all the time. Hey, Joseph, what's next? Like, can you help me figure out? I've been behind the stick for 15 years. Should I become an ambassador? Should I start my own business? Should I become a consultant like Tiffanie? You know, all of these questions. So I think mentorship, I think, is a really buzzword out of this. But, you know, again, the new school generation, but as well as our own colleagues who, you know, unfortunately don't have the resources to be able to just wake up tomorrow and say, okay, I'm starting a bar tomorrow. Okay, I'm starting an agency tomorrow, right? There's so many blocks. There's financial blocks. There's worth that we have to think about, right? There's so many different things that we battle that we have to figure out. But I think it's also, you know, and I'm going to pass this over to Rebecca, and Rebecca, I'm going to segue by saying this, you know, same question to you, but I want to acknowledge some of the stuff that Rebecca does. Rebecca really kind of, not only does she talk the talk, she walks the walk. And let me tell you how. She has taken on, I think, 2 or 3 pro bono clients, mezcal clients, young 5th generation, you know, purveyors who don't have the marketing dollars or the resources or the PR. Rebecca has personally taken them on. Rebecca and myself have been part of a forming organization that's kind of become a watchdog in the industry about ethical practices. You know, Rebecca has also, you know, been able to stand as a brown Latina business owner large scale global consulting. So that alone is a lot. So accolades to you, Rebecca. But the question for you again, because you've gone down that path, you are a product of the hospitality industry with your mom coming to this country and becoming a bartender. So you grew up in bars. I remember you telling me the story when you were 8 and 10, you know, behind the bar hiding because your mom was at work, right? No babysitter. And those
Counting
are
her tips.
Right.
Her Crown Royal bags. Crown Royal bags. I was
Crown
just
Royal
like,
bag.
oh, it's
There
where
you
your
go.
tip goes.
But I think it's important because your journey is a perfect example of what I'm getting at, right? You went from seeing it being done to being an ambassador to now being a global consultant, right? So for the next generation or the person that's kind of stagnant that wants to figure out what's next, what advice would you give to them? I kind of stole your thunder about what does it look like,
First
but
of all, thank
there's
you.
nothing
I
else.
mean, you said so much, babe. Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored. You know, just the flowers. Know your worth. You know, as part of the community, BIPOC community, there's times where you're just grateful to have a job. You're just so grateful. You know, you take the opportunity, but really know your worth and study your craft, understand your business acumen, right? Yes, marketing and you want to be Insta famous, que bueno, that's great. That's great. If that's your agenda, but you need to know the business aspect. What is your value and what value you bring to the table, right? Negotiating skills, right? You need to know what that big picture is, you know, not only as a business, but as you as yourself. And that's really important. I think specifically in the BIPOC space, women in particular, you know, we're very grateful. You know, I remember when I started, I was grateful to have a job, you know, oh, thank you, gracias, you know, but didn't realize, understood the value that I brought to the table. Yeah. And so that's extremely important. And so I also educate on the value of not only who they are, but the business that they're creating. Yeah.
Right.
And
so, in terms, just to kind of go a layer deeper, you know, business acumen is so important. Where do all of you and you can speak on it as I'm going through each and every one of you, but where do you go for business acumen? I mean, I will even tell you, after owning 2 successful companies, you know, for me to put together a P&L, Rebecca, which you know, like I didn't know where to go. I'd never done, I'm the creative side. Like, you know, where I reached out to SCORE, which is the Small Business Association's local chapters with retired executives, right, who are willing to coach you. I found that there was much cultural lag, right? They didn't understand the nuances and the beauty of our culture and what we bring to the table, but grateful for the overall business acumen. So where do you recommend, where do people go to get this business acumen, especially if you're in your 20s or 30s and you're not going back to school, right? Alba, it was so important that you mentioned the financial side of it as well, right? Like, how do we get investors? Like, what do we do? And it's probably its own seminar in itself, but if we can all kind of incorporate, you know, a very simple kind of 1, 2, 3 advice in terms of business acumen. You know, Rebecca, what is your perspective of where to go when you need business? And not you, because I know you're so open-hearted, you'd probably say, come to me, not you. But where else would people go to get this business acumen?
You know, I actually find other additional, you know, stakeholders, people that are mentors of mine. I will find people, I will ask questions, you know, don't be afraid to ask, you know, ask for help. I was very fortunate, you know, similar to Tomas, you know, I was very, very fortunate to have been groomed, you know, in the large corporations and structure. I came actually from the distributor side, you know, before the marketing side. So I really understood, you know, how to move boxes and really the end result and building relationships and so forth. And so depending on your career path, that's I would literally go with what is your intention, what is your overall goal, and then stick to that. If it's obviously opening up a bar and starting a business, the first person I would go to would be Alba. You know, really understanding the nuances and navigating that. You know, starting up a consulting agency. When I first started, Joseph, I went to you.
Yeah.
I mean, simple as that. What is your end goal? That's I would focus on that first.
You know, Joseph, before I forget, you know, going back to the question, like, what would we tell the young people who are just starting out? Last night, I had the opportunity to go see a friend at his book launch. He just launched a book called Go Where There Is No Path. And the 3rd chapter talks about hustling. And we, you know, I often tell mentees, is like, I like you because you're a hustler. Then I have to explain what I mean by that. But I think the success that a lot of you have demonstrated or can point to, there's been a lot of hustling. You know, I've been in marketing presentations where I tell people, Tito's vodka is an 18-year overnight sensation. You know, it didn't happen overnight. And there was a lot of hustling. And that's why my friend Chris Gray, who just released the book, he devoted an entire chapter to talk about the importance, and he launched his own company and it's doing very well. The importance of hustling. You know, things just don't fall from the sky. I'm sure Alba, as a small business owner, Rebecca, as all of you as small business owners, know that it doesn't happen overnight. Right. And I think it's important for us to tell our young mentees that. So even though I agree with you, Alba, you know, this generation wants things happening now, I think we have an opportunity to share with them the importance of hustling.
And Manny, what would you recommend for, like, you know, someone that's like on our side of the business? I know that Multicultural gets what, 5 to 10% of the overall general market budget, right? So on the dollar, we get 30 cents. You know, when we're looking at trying to, you know, sort of start businesses, and we understand that there is a humongous curve, right? How do you recommend approaching brands? Knowing that, you know, and I know you have fought the good fight, literally have fought for budgets for Black and Brown programming for a very, very, very long time. I mean, everything from Thurgood Marshall Foundation. I mean, I can go on and on and on. You've ran some of the most incredible community initiatives in the country. So what advice would you give in terms of maneuvering these kind of companies who need, you know, support from multicultural brands, these nonprofit organizations or things like that? How, very quickly, like, what do you recommend?
Well, I would just go straight to the issue of relevance. Like, I think what I've learned in my journey is that a lot of the things that are relevant to me as a brown person, to a Black or Asian person, are relevant to the larger community. And so if we as entrepreneurs can point to that, to these corporations, how what we're pushing, what initiative, what program we're pushing actually has broader relevance and not just to our communities, I think that's where you begin to tap into those bigger budgets. You know, I could go on, but I would definitely seize on the broader relevance. I guess it's inherent to our culture, instinctive to our culture, but I think more often than not, you know, people enjoy what we love more than they are willing to think about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Manny. So Tiffanie, same question for you. 2 parts. One of them, the first part would be, you know, for a young Black, Brown, LGBTQ woman approaching this business or currently in the business that wants to shift industries, what advice would you give for them? And what does giving back look like for you?
So, loaded question. Everything that everyone said, we need that. Really heavy on what Rebecca mentioned on knowing your worth. But knowing your value, as Manny just pointed out, the companies need the talent, but do they need the culture, the gender, or the category? And if you have those 3 things, I'm Black, I'm a female, and I'm queer, so it's like, okay, I have to embody a lot of culture, character, and presence there with that. We've already in the past numbers that those characteristics don't even matter. It's always been a certain demographic or gender. So if you step into that, of course, know your value, but also make sure you understand your representation. You can run with that, but you also have to, with value, give it some time. I'm definitely feeling these kids, but you still have to give it some time. Just because you're the cool guys, because they're so cool. They are. They're bold. They're ambitious. They're cool. But you still have to give it time. You still have to cook. We've worked really hard to give this level. So I would give the younger generation to understand your worth, understand your value, but give your value some time to cook. You are better in time. You're the best when you rest. and because this has just become a real job. All of us said 20 years. I've been here 20. I've been here 20. I've been here 20, and I believe that our success obviously came in time and experience. But I think, and I'm not trying to rush any of or put words in anyone's mouth, but I think some of us really understood our value even more recently because of the things that the brands are requiring or where the education is missing or what have you. So bring the kids on, but you still have to sit on the bench a little bit. Take your time. Take your time.
And Tomas, your journey from barback to, representing brands and everything in between, ambassadorship, advocacy, bartender, what advice do you have for that person who's coming to you for advice?
I think a big challenge growing up and also just stepping into this business trying to navigate was I didn't really understand what my values were. So what I realized was a way to go about that was to actually get inspired or find inspiration through other people. So I started finding points of inspiration that really resonated with me, and that helped me grow my value system. Because it's hard if you're not guided in it with a sense of value or just even talking about values, it's hard to understand what they are. So when you're able to pick up, instinctually pick up what resonates with you, what makes you feel good, what actually inspires you, that's another way of going about it, as opposed to just saying, it's another way of just really growing it from the inside out. So grow your values, but find inspiration in other people. I didn't have access to, I didn't understand the whole mentorship part. We're talking a lot about mentorship because we are mentors now, but I didn't understand the mentorship part. I was very insecure to even ask. And what I do see a lot is that younger hospitality, people in hospitality are often afraid to ask. So it's part of attaching yourself to things that make you feel good and inspire you, but also ask for mentors.
Ask and you shall receive.
Yeah, you got to put it out there. If you don't put it out there, you never get it. So just ask it. Mentorship is very important, and you don't have to just find it in one place. There are mentors in everywhere. You have to evolve your network. Your network has to evolve for you to evolve.
Agreed. There's so much power in community. And that, in fact, is the essence of what this whole panel was about. For me, very quickly, boils down to 3 words: power, passion, and purpose, right? Harness your power, cultivate your passion, and live your purpose. And I think that will get you pretty far on this journey. I think just to kind of recap, this was an incredibly powerful panel. I am so grateful to each and every one of you. And I hope everybody who's watching this understands why each and every person on this panel was selected to bring to the table their power, passion, and purpose, them living their truth and putting their stamp on the world. And it's so important. And Tomas, I'm glad that you ended with this idea about community. I've worked with each and every one of you individually. Alba, you not as much, but we are definitely soul brothers and sisters, and we will be doing bigger things in the future. More importantly, share the wealth. I have put money in not only many of your pockets, but many pockets along the way. And I'm a firm believer in sharing the wealth, in putting somebody on, as Manny mentioned, as we're hustling, right? But I think to make the change that we're talking about, right? When we talk about, again, let's kind of recap diversity in spirits, reclaiming our narrative as BIPOC and multicultural industry leaders. And I think to recap this, it boils down to a couple of things. 1, definitely knowing our worth, right? 2, cultivating our craft and being confident in our craft. And most importantly, it's about building a sense of community. Beyond this panel, this should be a panel that happens, thank you, Tales, for doing it, but this should be a panel that we do from, a much larger platform as an organization or as an initiative amongst, BIPOC and multicultural trade. Again, baby steps. And thank you, Tails, for giving me this platform. It's been years in the making. This is just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface. We have a shitload of work to do. But I think cracking the wall and beginning this really beautiful dialogue amongst all of you is exactly where we should be going, exactly what we need to do. So on behalf of me, Joseph D. Solis, thank you, Rebecca Quinonez, thank you, Alba Huerta, thank you, Manny Gonzalez, thank you, Tiffanie Barriere, thank you, Tomas DeLos Reyes, and thank you everybody who's participating. And thank you, Tails. Cheers, everybody.